We are back with the Santa Claus of the American economy. And by that, I mean his beneficence, not that he hands out gifts to every child in the world, despite the vicissitudes of time. Professor Bill Black. This is Anything Goes Friday, and that is the same thing as meaning your time to understand inverted yield curves. All right, so again, let's try it in the briefest version this way, or the clearest one that you use, not my words, your words. Explain the inverted yield curve.
Okay, so let me actually do the explanation I started that you cut me off because you thought I wasn't talking about inverted yield curves, but I actually was. We're talking about government debt, so that's special, sovereign debt. All right. And so it's not going to default. The issue is inflation, expected inflation. And so the reason that the normal yield curve goes up over time is you figure, hey, over 20, 30 years, there might be really substantial inflation. And my value won't be anywhere near as good because my interest rate won't go up and I'll end up losing money. And that's why over a longer time period, a government typically has to pay a higher rate of interest for longer maturities, like 30 years, because you have to compensate the people buying the bonds for the risk of inflation. So when we say the yield curve inverts instead of being normal, if it goes down where the United States government can actually borrow money for 30 years, much cheaper than it can borrow it for 3 months, then the public must be telling us, the investing public, we think interest rates are actually going to decline in the future. And again, the reason that that would happen is deflation, the opposite of inflation. Well, what brings deflation? The answer is recession. And that's why when you see the yield curve inverting, the logical explanation is that the investing public believes that the risk of recession has become severe.
That was excellent. Thank you very much. Why is, how often has an inverted yield curve predicted a recession? How often has it been wrong? Is that an answerable question?
Yeah, so that's an excellent question, and that San Francisco Fed study answers it, and the answer is really bad. It's been right really a lot. Yeah. And the one case where it was not right, growth was cut in half. It didn't actually lead to a recession, but growth went down very substantially. So if you want an indicator of not good stuff in the future, an inverted yield curve is the best indicator. And the second best, and it's related, is negative yields on government debt. And a big chunk of the world now has negative interest rates. Which, of course, is like sort of mind-boggling even to economists.
So explain that one again, without me getting in your way. Explain the negative yield on government debt.
You're going to get back less money than you paid them when you loaned the money.
And who's the you and who's the them?
The means the government effectively is paying a negative rate of interest. You as the purchaser of their bonds is paying them for the privilege of lending them money, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So, and again, the only reason it makes sense is because you're expecting really severe deflation. And so when you get back 95 cents on the dollar, because of deflation, that 95 cents is actually going to be worth more than a dollar was a year ago.
So on deflation, we have had at least very, very low inflation, even in times of significant economic growth, even in times of low unemployment like now? And I've read various explanations for this, including, I mean, one of the, maybe two, you've got probably better ones than I've got, but the two that stick with me are, one, that the rise of information technology, essentially robotization, automation, has driven down, the second one essentially driving down labor costs. So the automation essentially combines both of those things, but that essentially that Amazon is driving down prices a bunch. The internet is driving down prices a bunch, so that even though we are producing more, there is more growth, that prices aren't rising as much. Then there's some places where prices are rising a lot. Pharmaceuticals are rising, home prices are rising, but a lot of personal goods, they're not. What is your quibble with that, or what is that missing? And the reason I ask that question, at the risk of asking a compound question, is that is there some chance that that there's noise in the yield curve inversion, that as investors are looking out ahead, they're not necessarily betting on that we're going to have an economic collapse or a dip, but just expecting that prices are going to continue to be driven down by automation and technology?
So yes, there is the possibility that things are different, right? That something has fundamentally changed in the economy, and that an inverted yield curve doesn't mean what it used to mean. But of course, that chance existed the 10 previous times before as well.
Yeah.
And in no case did it
ever happen
to be true. Don't get too hopeful that there's something magic that has happened that we don't know about. So here's the kickers that
and
make
about
us
to kick
more
us off
concerned.
the air. I was going to ask you, what's the dumbest thing the current president has done, or the most important thing the next president needs to do before they go to break? But feel free to finish however you want.
Okay, so the dumbest thing is to ignore climate change and to suggest that it's completely fictional. There are great advantages to starting earlier, and if you want to be the future tech leaders and job leaders, you want to be ahead of the curve, and we are putting ourselves under the curve.
What are mistakes you think that are being made in economic planning right now?
Sure. So the first obvious one is the self-inflicted wound of the tariffs. This is causing all kinds of business upsetness. That translates to risk. Risk translates to higher interest rates normally, and you still see declining interest rates. That's really bad. That means that they think that this risk is likely to produce not inflation, but recession.
And is it your view that we shouldn't fiddle with tariffs at all, or that just the timing or method is bad?
Well, we're always fiddling with tariffs.
Do you think that they've been at the right level? Do you think we should have lower or higher tariffs, or do you think it's more an issue of timing?
So here, historically, tariffs are very low compared to historical times. In times when tariffs have gotten very high, that has almost always been a great signal, not just of recession, but of a really severe depression. So getting in a trade war about tariffs is like two guys getting out and playing Russian roulette. It's mutually stupid type of thing. We are engaged in a mutually stupid thing that could end up incredibly badly.
What would a Bill Black president do about tariffs?
Well, I wouldn't do tariffs per se, all right? So it's an individual question. So does anybody gain by a trade war of this kind? No. But what if one side is systematically gaming the system, right? Through subsidies and such. And then, really will have the industrial potential flow out of the country that isn't gaming it to the one that is. And in that sense, then you have to be able to have some form of retaliation. Now, the world system actually allows that retaliation. Trump is not doing that, right? This is not retaliation for tariffs. This is weird stuff like, supposedly Canada for posing a national security threat to the United States, and slapping tariffs on one of our closest allies and such. This is efforts because Trump hates NATO and the European Union.